You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koos, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
Hey everybody, there's been a lot of TikTok videos, Instagram reels, all kinds of advice, we're going to call it, for lack of a better word, out there in the internet, on the interwebs, having to do with financial advice. Some of the things sound really, really outlandish, and then, of course, the more outlandish and the crazier they sound, and when I say crazy, I mean crazy good, the more they get passed around, and people start thinking that, you know, these are strategies that anyone could implement. So one of the ones that I saw recently was something having to do with buying life insurance and creating what's called intergenerational wealth. And while the way it was explained on TikTok and Instagram wasn't exactly accurate, I thought it would be a good idea to sit down with a professional who actually understands this stuff. Granted, you know, I'm a CFP, so I'm pretty dangerous when it comes to advanced insurance strategies, but I sat down with Dan Brookman again to go over how to build intergenerational wealth like the Rockefellars. So check out this podcast. Let me know what you think. Feel free to subscribe and enjoy my conversation with Dan Brookman. All right, everybody. I've got Dan Brookman on again. Last time I talked to Dan and we did a podcast. I was going to say I talk to Dan all the time, but last time we did a podcast, we did, I think it was a 3-part series, wasn't it? Didn't we do something like life insurance, disability, and long-term care in 3 separate episodes, maybe last summer or 2 summers ago?
It was something like that. I know we definitely hit on life, disability, and long-term care. It was a series. I just don't remember when it was. It was 21 or 22. The years were all blended together.
I remember it. I remember thinking about doing something and how very quickly we realized that trying to do all 3 at once was going to be mind-numbing. So today we're doing something a little bit different. So if you want to go check those out, there are 3 different podcasts, each of which focus on disability insurance. The next one would focus on just life insurance. And the last one focuses on only long-term care insurance. They're purely educational. Lots of good stuff in there if you're trying to get educated and you're not looking to be sold anything, because obviously that's not what we do here. But today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. There's, and with the world changing, COVID, social media just getting bigger and bigger, whether it be in business, you might look at LinkedIn, but I think most people in their personal lives, they're looking at things like Facebook, they're looking at Instagram. And one of the most recent things that was sent to me by a client that I then turned around and sent to Dan here was this clickbait video on Instagram that basically talked about building wealth like the Rockefellars, which is awesome clickbait, by the way, because who wouldn't want to do that, right? Basically what they were talking about was this, very, very quick reel. For those of you that don't know what a reel is, on Instagram, they call them reels. TikTok, I don't know what they call them. They call them something different, I think. YouTube, they call them shorts. But it was like, a very short, call it 1-minute video that kind of rapid fires through how you can basically build intergenerational family wealth in a relatively short period of time. When I say relatively, that's an important word here. But we're talking millions of dollars of tax-free wealth over the course of time, building a legacy for your family. And as I went over it, the first thing I did is I reached out to Dan. I said, all right. I was like, I'm pretty dangerous when it comes to this stuff. I'm a certified financial planner. I've been in the business for 22 years. So I get most of this stuff, and it makes, for the most part, makes sense to me, but fill in the blanks for me here. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about, a Rockefeller intergenerational family legacy plan. So why don't we just start right there, Dan? So I purposely waited for you to take a drink so that you could try and answer me right before you swallow. But no, in all seriousness, what is this legacy plan? Let's kind of define it first.
Yeah, sure. So, and there's a lot of good information out there on the internet too, if you want to dig and learn about some of this stuff. But there's a variety of tools out there, and when you see kind of that clickbait, they're going to run through it real quick. They're going to talk about trust, and they're going to talk about banks, and trustees, and life insurance, and this and that, the other thing, and it is that, but to put it simply, what it really is, it's just using a combination of a legal and tax strategy combined with the power of life insurance, which is a tax advantage vehicle, a tax advantage tool, probably the not probably is the best wealth transfer tool in existence. And so you're going to use that tool in conjunction with some legal and some tax planning in order to, and some really creative legal planning too, by the way, in order to get a real multiplying effect going, where after a handful of generations, you can take, still a big sum of money, but relatively modest compared to what you're going to be able to turn it into. And so that's kind of what we're going to get into a little bit more, is kind of some of the details of the mechanics without getting too wonky. And so we're going to do it a little bit more justice than just like a YouTube short, like a 30-second clip,
Oh,
where it leaves you wondering like, oh, hey, okay, sounds cool, but what now?
So basically, it's taking somebody starts, right? Somebody has to start the ball rolling. But somebody starts this wealth plan, this legacy plan, and then over the course of one, then two generations, and eventually three, the more time that goes on, the bigger the wealth gets. It's all tax free, and before you know it, you could be taking care of your family for generations to come, having nothing to do with work or income, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yep.
So it sounds too good to be true. So, how does it work, or better yet, what does it do, and why is it so exciting, and why is it such great clickbait?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what it really does is two things, I would say. Number one, is the taxation effect, right? By doing the correct legal and tax structure for the plan, it's going to allow not just this first generation of wealth to bypass taxes, it's going to allow that taxation to continue, not only be deferred, but just not exist. No taxation of the assets.
Okay.
So it's the tax factor. But in addition to that, then it's the multiplying effect, the multiplying power of life insurance. How you're going to basically take dimes to buy dollars, and so when you take those two things together, the tax free combined with the compounding impact of permanent paid up life insurance, that's where it's getting its lure from. That's where it's really attractive.
Now we're not talking about. I want to be clear, because I think that life insurance has its place. I think sometimes it gets a bad rap, but I also think that it sometimes gets a bad rap for a good reason. I mean, I think sometimes it's oversold, it's missold. I think sometimes people go straight for like a life insurance retirement plan, a LIRP, or I've heard it called an ELIP before as well, where people go straight for the jugular and say, hey, before you invest in your 401k, your Roth IRA, let's go put together an executive benefit plan using life insurance. Probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? This is different. We're not talking about somebody building multi-generational wealth, as using their first dollar, right? We're
Yeah,
talking about them. We're talking about taking once you've taken care of yourself, once you've put together your retirement plan, once you've funded that plan, and your retirement is well taken care of essentially, and or you're already retired and your retirement income plan is taken care of, then it's with excess money above and beyond that discretionary money. That's what we're talking about building that legacy with, correct?
yeah, absolutely, 100%. And so, yeah, everybody's got maybe, just to put it almost too simplistically, a few different buckets. You've got a
Great way to
consumption
look at it.
bucket, right? And that's everything you need to support your lifestyle. An emergency bucket, emergency savings, um, insurances, health insurance, things of that nature. And then you've kind of got what you might call a legacy bucket, or this is basically excess wealth. This is money that, you're just likely never going to need or never going to spend. And then for this strategy in particular, we're not even talking about taking all of that excess wealth. We're saying, hey, maybe we'll take a portion of that excess wealth to
Mhm.
implement this strategy if you're a well qualified candidate and it makes good sense for you.
That's a really good point you make there too, because I never want people to think that you should ever implement any strategy with all of any bucket, right? I mean, and by the way, I love the bucket analogy. It's not too simplistic. In fact, I think simple is always best, especially in finance. I like to I'll call it now money, later money, and never money. So your now money is the money you're going to spend today. It's the money you work with today for vacations, fixed expenses, variable expenses. Your later money is the money you're going to spend later, whether that be on future expenses, fixed or variable, new homes, cars, toys, vehicles, second homes, downsizing. And then your never money is the money that, not everybody has never money. But the never money is the money that you're like, I did such a great job of planning and I'm such a great saver. Even though we don't always feel that way. Most clients don't feel that way. Which, by the way, that's what makes them such great savers, is because they don't feel that way. But I digress. I think that what ends up happening is they end up having this never money because there's this bucket of excess cash that, because they're good savers, because they're relatively reasonable people, they're not frivolous spenders, that they end up having this excess money. So I'm really glad you make that point, that we're not going to we would never recommend taking the entire bucket of never money and throwing it into a strategy. So I was going to ask next where the money comes from. And I don't even know if that's a good question or not, but how would you answer that? I'm going to make it a bad question to make you answer it anyway.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So we're talking once again just about this excess wealth, and depending on who you are, that could be in a variety of things. You know what I mean? It could be in qualified retirement accounts, or it could be outside in a brokerage account. It could be in real estate. It could be in a lot of different things.
Good point.
But obviously, if you're going to get to this strategy, which does involve purchasing life insurance, you're going to have to get that money into basically after tax dollars. So whatever that excess wealth is currently sitting in, there would have to be some sort of a strategy for getting that into dollars. If it's already just sitting, you have $1 million just sitting in cash anyways, well, then it's already in the format that you need it in. But most people don't keep their excess wealth, at least not that much of it, in just in a savings account.
And what about now that we understand the basics here, at least the basic mechanics, what are maybe some of the more advanced mechanics with regard to how it works? You had mentioned to me before we started recording today that there were some simple steps. And of course, when you have steps, you should always have how many steps?
3.
Always 3.
Fast, easy, simple
so we
steps.
should have 3 steps. So what are the 3 steps? Let's walk me through it.
Definitely. So the first step is going to be the legal side. So say that you're a couple age 65, you have excess wealth, you want to implement this strategy. Really, the first place you're going to need to go is to an attorney who is experienced in estate planning, specifically, with dynasty trust, with this kind of planning, because there is going to be some intricacies and some details and a lot of stuff that is, way beyond my depth, as a non-attorney. But you're going to need to go to somebody who's experienced in that, and you're going to have to set up a trust, because the trust is going to be the vehicle by which this plan perpetuates itself over time.
Okay. Trust is a very big word. I'm not literally going to say a million. There's a lot of trusts out there, as we both know. What kind of trust do we need here?
Well, the main thing that you need to make sure of, and obviously the attorney you consult with is going to know this in more detail, but it needs to be an irrevocable trust. And the reason it needs to be irrevocable is because that's what's going to give it the tax advantages. Sure, there's lots of differences between revocable and irrevocable trust, but the key difference for our purposes in this conversation is the tax nature of the assets inside of it. And so you want to go with an irrevocable trust.
And it's I know that there's got to be different states or areas of the country that call it irrevocable or revocable, right?
Sure.
Maybe we have to ask an attorney and bring them on to figure out, who says irrevocable and who says irrevocable, and which one, maybe have an argument about which one's right, because, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So an irrevocable trust or an irrevocable trust needs to be taken care of by an attorney. Obviously, you and I are not attorneys. We both have attorneys on our team, not literally, but people that we know, like, and trust, that we would obviously involve in a strategy like this. But what's step 2?
So step number 2 is going to be the life insurance placement. And that's where, the key things that you're going to want to think about here is going to be, how much, once again, how much premium, how much excess wealth, how are we getting those
Premium
dollars
mean how much you're
into,
paying. Yep.
yeah, how much yep, exactly. How much you're paying. How are we going to get those dollars of excess wealth into just cash that we can stroke a check to the insurance company for? So all of that part, and then making sure that we're doing the product selection, the carrier selection. Are we, depending on the size of the strategy, there could be multiple carriers involved, and there could be multiple policies involved. But for our example, in this, you just use one policy with one company, and a single premium permanent life insurance policy. That's what's important, is that you want it to be permanent. That means it needs to be in effect the day that either, one or both spouses, pass away. It needs to be in effect the day they die. You could have multiple premiums, but just for simplicity's sake, we like the single premium. You just have one easy premium, boom, it's paid up, it's done, and you don't have to think about it again.
Okay, I was actually just going to ask that. So a strategy like this can work with a premium you pay. In other words, where you pay a cost for the insurance annually for several years. It could probably be a second to die policy, even where the insurance pays on the passing of the second spouse. But in most cases, the best way to do this is single premium. Pay one time and let it go, right?
Sure, absolutely. But think about that scenario where that maybe that couple had a lot of their excess wealth tied up in real estate, and that real estate is generating revenue.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe they don't want to sell off that income producing asset, but they want to use a portion of the income that asset is producing to fund the life insurance. So you certainly could do it that way. I just think sometimes in our minds we think as simple as possible. It's like, okay, single premium, permanent, boom, done, paid up. And it's forgotten about, but there's lots of different ways that you go about the funding of it. The key is getting the product right, making sure that it's in effect the day that you or both spouses pass away. Because if the policy lapses or the insurance company just goes belly up, well, that was a whole lot of planning for a whole lot of nothing. So that's a really important. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not to muddy the waters or go off the rails here. But when we start talking about real estate, one of the first, I can hear people almost coming out of my ceiling here saying, oh, well, I got to pay the tax. Well, ironically enough, we're sitting here talking about tax-free life insurance. We're talking about, building multi-generational wealth. There are things out there you can do with real estate, whether that's, taking the income from the real estate to pay for premiums. We could have part of a real estate portfolio and sell it, pay the tax, and use the net proceeds to pay for a policy, selling the other portion of the portfolio and 1031ing it into a non-traded portfolio, a private placement that avoids all the tax literally indefinitely for the rest of your life. And then it steps up in basis to your kids. So you wouldn't have to pay tax on that as well. If you're still concerned about the tax you would pay on the amount that goes in the life insurance policy, if you want to get really creative, there's some really, really fun stuff. I call it fun because I think it's interesting, but there's some fun stuff you can start doing with things like charitable trusts and foundations that can eliminate that tax. Again, this is never money, right? So if it's never money, then we can avoid the tax. I guess if that's a problem, there are always ways that we can avoid, not evade, avoid the tax. So you mentioned carriers. There's a lot of insurance companies out there, obviously. I couldn't even list them all. How do you know who to pick when it comes to carrier selection?
Yeah. So, good question. What you're going to want to do is, work with an experienced advisor or agent, somebody who is placing multiple, lots of policies and specifically, larger placement policies. And also for strategies that with longer term, time horizons, because you just want to make sure that with the carrier selection, you are picking somebody who is financially stable, somebody who is going to not just be there to pay out a claim in 10 years, but is going to be there to pay out a claim in 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, potentially. You know what I mean? So you want to make sure you're just doing very good due diligence on the insurance carrier themselves. It can start by looking at an AM Best score, and AM Best is certainly doing a good job. But me and my team, we're going to look into even a few other additional details and just be very confident in the company that we're trusting to keep this promise to us. Because I see it plenty of times. It's not necessarily that the insurance company went away altogether, but they got gobbled up by another insurance company and so on and so forth. And there are, on occasion companies that fail, and states have guarantee funds, but guarantee funds are not good for a strategy like this because they're very limited in what they'll pay, what they'll actually pay. And you need this to be with a company that's going to last.
So ratings, which is what AM Best is, ratings are important, but it probably makes sense to go deeper than that and look at, most people might not know that insurance companies, if they're a good company, if they're high quality, they typically have something called reinsurance, where they've insured themselves in case something goes wrong at the company. So not only does it make sense for them to be high quality, great financials, but they need to have reinsurance, and that those reinsurance companies that are insuring them need to be high quality as well. So step 3, where the magic happens, right? Like MTV
absolutely.
Cribs.
Yes. So once we got into step 3, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, it's important that when it comes to the life insurance, that's also structured correctly with the trust as the owner and beneficiary of the life insurance policy. Seems kind of weird, for people who don't think about this or do this stuff all the time.
Let's define that, because that's a little confusing. So
yeah,
trusts are confusing to new financial advisors, let alone the public. So what's that mean?
Yeah. So a trust, is going to get its own social security number. Essentially, it's called a tax ID number. So more or less, it is an individual person, but it's a legal entity that's acting as a person essentially. And so that entity then that's been created with its own tax ID number is going to become the owner of the life insurance policy. And then also the beneficiary of it. And I know it's a little bit confusing because most of the time, people, when they're doing just their basic life insurance planning, they own their policy that they're the insured of, and then they name their spouse or their kids or somebody, their beneficiaries. Well, in this circumstance, what we want the trust to own it because it's an irrevocable trust. So that's going to help us on the tax side. And then we want the assets, once the life insurance is dispersed, to go into the trust. So we need the trust to be the beneficiary of the policy itself as well. The insured in this circumstance is going to be, our couple who bought this survivorship, last to die essentially policy. In our example, they took $1 million. And when I cite this example, I ran some numbers just to kind of, for the purposes of our conversation, they take $1 million to buy a $2.5 million life insurance policy.
Okay.
They take $1 million
premium.
Yep.
By a $2.5 million death benefit.
Yep.
In the irrevocable trust, payable to the irrevocable trust.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Beautiful. So now, after the couple passes away, so if their last spouse dies, the $2.5 million, along with any other trust assets that maybe have gone into the trust, go into the trust. Now, this is where that creative attorney really comes into play, because if you really want this to work as a dynasty trust, where it's not just going to go to this next generation and then from there, you need to set up rules that the trustee is going to basically be the trust manager. It could be an individual, or there's trust companies out there. You can make a corporate, you can make a bank. Yeah, you can have a bank's trust department be the trust. And then the trust itself will have a set of rules that the trustee has to abide by. And one of those rules that you could make, just hypothetically, is, this trust, the beneficiaries, in order for the beneficiaries to have access to the trust assets, they're required to buy permanent, fully paid up life insurance. Now, the trust will buy it, but they're required to apply for it. And once again, they're going to be the insured. The trust is going to own it. The trust is going to be the beneficiary of it. So in the example that I ran, we didn't even require them to use all of the life insurance proceeds. So
which is the whole point, right? I mean, that's the goal. Yeah.
Right. So that they can use some of those life insurance proceeds, right? As they can be beneficiaries of some of it. But we did say in our example that $1 million of that 2.5 million that was left behind would have to go to buy permanent life insurance on the beneficiaries. And then in my example, I just made those beneficiaries be 6 individuals, 2 children, 4 grandchildren.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
so the 2 children, the 4 grandchildren, based on varying ages and varying amounts, we could roughly take that $1 million and buy approximately $6 million of life insurance on them.
Now
That's
we're talking.
fully, yeah, exactly. So it's fully paid for. And because it's inside of the trust, with the trust as the owner and the trust as the beneficiary, it continues to be tax-free. And then that they can stipulate then that the next generation also has to take, we'll just say 50% of that. So
And
they
that
have to
can
take
grow
3 million.
too, right? I
Of
mean,
course, yeah.
obviously there's cash value inside the policy, so it's not going to stay at 6. It should
Right.
grow over time, over their lives. So sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, I mean, depending on how you structure the policy, absolutely, especially if you're using an index variable, there's different policies and different structures where, those amounts could grow as well. But the real power is as that goes to another generation and another generation, as it becomes, 18 million, 50 million, 80 million, you know what I mean? And it
Yeah.
continues to grow and grow and grow from there if it's continued to be perpetuated. And in our example, we didn't even, use the full life insurance amount. But if you did, 2.5 million might buy 15 million of life insurance. And now that
Right.
next generation is going to buy $200 million of life insurance. And you can see very quickly in 3 to 6 generations, you're taking $1 million of premium, and 5, 6 generations later, you've created a $200 million tax-free
Pretty
estate.
incredible. Yeah. So just to kind of run through it one more time then, from Gen 1, call it patient 0, they buy that $1 million of death benefit. They're not putting $1 million away. They're just buying $1 million death benefit, correct?
No. We had them take $1 million of premium to buy a $2.5 million
Gotcha.
death benefit.
Okay.
But
So $1
you
million
could use,
premium to buy
yep,
$2.5 million of death benefit. Generation 2 takes that $2.5 million,
mhm,
keeps $1.5 million tax free for themselves, by the way,
yep,
and then uses $1 million to buy $6 million on themselves.
mhm.
Next time, the next generation, I'm just going to throw numbers around. Maybe that generation can take 3 million
Mhm.
instead of 1.5, but then buy $3 million of insurance that maybe then turns around and buys 12 million, 15,
Probably closer to 20
20
million,
million.
honestly, because we went 6 times. We went from a million, well, yeah, because of what we actually used. So we went 6 times. We took 1 million and turned it into 6 million.
Okay.
So if we took 3 million over that next generation, yeah, hypothetically 18, 20 million, and
20
then
million.
that generation could 5 times it from there.
Yeah. And they're not, and the crazy part is that if this is done well over time, by a family that really communicates well and really, helps the next generation understand and educates them on how amazing this could be, for their family, the more time goes by, the more everybody benefits, not only now, but later. And I'm talking in a huge way, obviously. I mean, you kind of threw it out there. I mean, you didn't do the hypothetical, obviously, but I mean, a few generations down, it gets up into the, $100 million range,
Yeah.
which is, talk about a good problem to have. But anyway,
Yeah, and
okay.
and by the way, what we started with as far as the Rockefellars, this is what they did more or less. I mean, obviously I'm not privy to all the details of everything,
The
but
history expert, yeah.
yeah, it's pretty public information. And I found some interesting stuff as I was doing a little research on this too. The difference between the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts.
Yeah.
Both families immensely wealthy back in the late 19th century. John Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Hmm.
Well, the Vanderbilts had evaporated through their wealth by roughly the mid 20th century.
Yeah.
Less than 100 years, and all that wealth was basically gone. Whereas the Rockefellers, through planning like this, I mean, you're as prominent as a family gets, is still today in our life. You think of the Rockefeller, even the clickbait of the title only had clickbait because it had the name Rockefeller in it. People are like, they identify that, right? So
Hmm.
it's a big difference between the strategic planning that one family did and the non-strategic planning that another.
Well, and I think that, we're going to go again. We are going off the rails now, but I mean, having nothing to do with life insurance, it's, Rockefeller was such a young and just brilliant mind, with apparently no remorse whatsoever. I mean, I'm probably all those people back in the day were probably very difficult to do business with. They say, "Oh, I miss the days of a handshake." I don't know if I agree with that or not. But when you consider like the Vanderbilts and the railroads and how maybe they were a little bit stubborn, and the Rockefellers, and it's like, well, okay, well, if this is going to turn into a game, then somebody's going to lose is the problem with the game. And that was part of that loss, not only by not implementing intelligent strategies to preserve and extend the wealth that they'd built like the Rockefellers did, making poor decisions to do the exact opposite, not just not grow it, but to make poor decisions to lose what you currently have. But again, I digress. So for those, let's close here. For those who are listening, watching, there's been a lot of complicated information. How do I know if I'm a good candidate for a strategy like this? So, for instance, how much money do you have to have in order to make this work? And furthermore, how would I know right off the bat if I'm a good candidate, or if this makes no sense at all for me?
Yeah. So I would just use as a general kind of rule of thumb, good candidates to start a conversation on a strategy like this probably have at least around $1 million of what we've defined as excess wealth. That's $1 million that you're very highly likely to never need to spend, because then you could take a very reasonable portion of that, call it 20% of that, and begin a wealth building strategy like this.
Okay.
So somebody who's in that ballpark, it's at least, if they're interested at all in this, that would be who I'd recommend at least have a conversation about it.
You can still start smaller.
Their team.
Like you don't have to buy $1 million life insurance policy. You can start smaller.
Well, just for example, if there was a couple age 60, let's just say, and they had $1 million of excess wealth, and they took 25% of that, about $250,000, they could then buy $1 million of life insurance.
Okay.
That was fully paid for. They take $250,000, boom, they buy $1 million life insurance policy, set up that irrevocable trust, and now they've started that ball rolling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On the strategy. You can do it with smaller numbers. You can do it with bigger numbers. Obviously, with bigger numbers, it's more impressive and it's going to get bigger quicker. Yeah, it's going to happen faster. But certainly, you do need to have some money. It's not for everybody, but you do need to have some money. But it's not necessarily like you have to be the Rockefellers in order to implement something like this.
Yeah. So maybe somebody who doesn't make any sense for it all would probably be somebody who we've done their retirement plan. They've got maybe one pension, a couple Social Security incomes coming in, and when we look at their plan, it's like their nest egg is pretty much filling that gap between what they need and what they have, and that includes variable expenses, by the way, to the end of their lives. And they're really, while there might be money left over at the end, because for most people there is. I mean, we never want to make a retirement plan and solve for $1 at the end, at the very end. That makes no sense. Yeah. We hear no shortage of jokes, by the way, in our office about spending the last dollar on your deathbed, but we never plan for that. But so right. It's got to be obviously better than that. So all right, well, that makes sense. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Dan Brookman with Stolly Insurance. That's stolly.com. If you have any questions, if you want to learn more about this strategy, even if you just want an intro call to talk more about it, we will not charge you a dime to have an intro call or set up a Zoom meeting just to chit chat, learn more about your situation and see if this might make sense for you. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us. You have thousands of podcasts to pick from, and you chose to listen to ours today. So make it a great day. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koos. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.